For you Warlock mains out there, as you know, we've been eating good with Prismatic, the new Song of Flame Super, and the new exotics that came with the final shape. In a previous video, I already talked about the Speaker Sight exotic helmet and gave you two builds, one for both Prismatic and the Solar subclass, that can help you be the ultimate support Warlock for your team. But in this video, I wanted to talk about the other exotic, the Mataiodoxia Exotic chest piece, and why it's extremely good for endgame content and give you a build for it. Let's not waste any time and dive right into it. Its perk is called Stylostyxis, and targets damaged by Arcane Needle emit a suspending detonation when defeated, and landing multiple Arcane Needles on the same target immediately triggers a larger, more powerful detonation. Defeating suspended targets grants melee energy, and your Arcane Needles are strong against barrier champions. I know that was a long description, but essentially, as long as we have that Arcane Needle melee and we hit a target or kill that target, it will cause that suspending detonation, or if you hit a target with all three, that will automatically suspend them, so you can handle unstoppable champions just with that. And to stop anti-barrier champions once the shield's up, it requires one melee. You don't have to do 2 or 3, just requires 1 no matter the content. Now, on how to set up your subclass, I'm going to be doing a Prismatic and a Strand subclass breakdown, and with Prismatic in particular, there are a million options you can choose from. I'm just going to give you what I like using and a couple options that can help you deal with the overload champion, since the chest piece can't handle those. So under Prismatic, for your super, would highly recommend Song of Flame. Again, this is the new super. You can spam your abilities and get massive damage resistance and help out your teammates as well. This is pretty much a mobile Well of Radiance. This super is just way too good not to use, but if you did want to use, you know, Needle Storm or something like Nova Bomb, you totally can, but Song of Flame is definitely the one I would recommend overall. For your abilities, I personally like Phoenix Dive here for the cure for me and my allies, but if you want to use the Healing Rift, you can totally go for it. For movement, I like Burst Glide, but you can use what you like. For the melee, obviously, we're going to need Arcane Needle to take advantage of the chest piece, and for the grenade, you do have multiple options here. Now, I do like using the Storm Grenade when paired with Facet of Dominance, because that allows my Arc Grenade to jolt targets, and that jolt can stun overload champions, which is something that I really like. Or if you want to use something like the Vortex Grenade, it'll also weaken those targets, and the reason that's important is because under the artifact, we have Void Hegemony. So when we have that Prismatic subclass equipped, defeating weakened targets provides a small Void Overshield, so that's more survivability, and Expanding Abyss, Void sources deal increased damage to weakened targets, so any Void weapons, any Void abilities can deal increased damage to any target that is weakened. If you want to use the Healing Grenade for survivability or the Cold Snap Grenade to freeze and even stop unstoppable champions, you can totally do so. I just really like using the Storm Grenade with Facet of Dominance. For your aspects, the important one is Feed the Void. So defeat a target with any ability to activate Devour. Your Devour effects are improved, restoring additional health and grenade energy. Essentially, once Devour is procced, every kill you get is going to restore you to full health, and also going to give you grenade energy, which is going to be good for survivability and ability regen overall. It's a little tougher to achieve in something like, you know, Grandmaster content, but with how many abilities we're having and tangles we're going to be able to explode and all this other stuff, it's going to be pretty easy to achieve overall. Now for your second aspect, I just went with Hellion, which again is that Solar Mortar that's going to spawn whenever I use my class ability, which I do like. It can cause ignitions, it can proc Devour, and all that great jazz. But if you didn't want to use Hellion, honestly, you could go with Bleak Watcher. Again, that's going to be good for slowing targets for those overload champs and freezing them for those unstoppable champions. So Bleak Watcher is a good option as well, especially with Devour. You can have multiple grenades on the field. I just liked Hellion when I was using the Storm Grenade, but to be honest, I would either go with Hellion or the Bleak Watcher here. Out of all the fragments, these are the 5 that I personally like. Number 1 being Facet of Hope. While you have any elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly, which means we can have the Phoenix Dive more often, which means we can have Hellion more often. So that's why I like having this set up. Next is Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, and rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. Again, it's going to be good for ability regen overall. Granted, it's not absolutely needed, but I do like having that melee ability as much as possible to take advantage of the exotic. Next, I really like Facet of Dominance, like I mentioned, when using the Storm or the Vortex Grenade, but if you aren't using either of those grenades, you can switch this one out. So if you want to switch out these first 3, you totally can. I would recommend either Facet of Grace, especially if you're using a kinetic weapon. It's going to give you bonus Transcendence energy. It is a -10 resilience, so you're going to have to keep that in mind. Next, with Facet of Sacrifice and Facet of Devotion, pretty much while you have any light buff, ability Final Blows is going to give you bonus Darkness Transcendence energy, and any target that's affected by a Darkness debuff, it's going to give you light Transcendence energy. So that means you can get the Transcendence back even faster, and you get a +10 to Discipline and a +10 to Strength. Lastly, a decent one that I also like using is Facet of Solitude. So landing rapid precision hits emits a Severing Blast from the target, while Transcendent, the Severing Blast is bigger. This is good for the debuff and can also spawn a Tangle when you defeat that target. Now, the last two I always recommend. Number one being Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. While Transcendent, the effect is increased. That's a plus 10 to Strength. And then lastly, Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power is going to grant you a buff based on the super you're using. And in this case, since we're using the Song of Flame super, we're going to have Restoration whenever we pick up an Orb of Power, which is going to be good for getting that health back. Now, the Strand subclass is going to be a lot easier to cover, so let's run through it. For your abilities, I like the Healing Rift here. Burst Glide for movement, but you can use what you like. We only have the one melee, which is Arcane Needle, and then I would highly recommend the Shackle Grenade. Now, the reason we want that is because with our Aspect Mind Sprung Invocation, if we consume our Shackle Grenade, it'll activate Weaver's Trance. So Final Blows, while Weaver's Trance is active, create a suspending detonation. And obviously, the main thing with the exotic chess piece is that when you defeat suspended targets, you can get the melee back faster. So any weapon Final Blows, the melee is already going to suspend targets if you kill that target. But the main thing here is to get the suspend to have the melee as much as possible, which is why we're going to be pairing this with our other aspect, the Wander. So tangles you throw attach to targets and detonate into a suspending burst. Destroying a tangle creates a suspending burst after a short delay. Threading Final Blows create a tangle. For fragments, I'm opting to use Thread of Generation. So dealing damage generates grenade energy. It's a minus 10 to discipline. Any damage we do is going to give us grenade energy, whether it's from our weapons or abilities, doesn't really matter. We get the grenade back faster. Next, Thread of Warding. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. It's a minus 10 to resilience, but we pretty much get more damage resistance on top of our 100 resilience, so that's going to be very good. Next, Thread of Fury. Damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy. It's a minus 10 to strength, so whenever we destroy a tangle, it'll give us more melee energy back, which is good. And for your last one, I do like Thread of Wisdom. So defeating suspended targets creates an Orb of Power, but you do have a couple of options here, like Thread of Mind. So when you defeat suspended targets, it's going to grant you class ability energy. Could also go with Thread of Isolation. Landing rapid precision hits emits a severing burst from the target. And then lastly, Thread of Continuity, which is going to have an increased duration for any Strand debuff. Like I said, the setup for this one is a lot easier and causes a lot more suspend, but you also lose out on Transcendence in the Prismatic subclass, so I do recommend using Prismatic overall. For your artifact perks in the first column for weapon champion mods, you can use what you like. Same thing for the second column. Again, these are going to give bonuses to the origin traits for the current weapons in rotation, so definitely give this a look through. In the third column, I do like Elemental Siphon, so rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super will create an element to pick up that matches your equipped super. And if I'm using a Strand weapon, I really like Thread of Blast, so destroying a tangle with a Strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. And the AoE for that is just absolutely insane, and it can proc Devour, which is pretty cool. In the last two columns, I do like Counter Energy, so when you or a member of your fire team stuns a champion, you gain energy for your least charged ability. That's going to be good for endgame content that has champs in it. Radiant Orbs is pretty good, so while we have the Prismatic subclass equipped, picking up an Orb of Power makes you Radiant. Then also with Galvanic Armor, while we have the Prismatic subclass equipped, incoming damage from combatants is reduced while amplified, and that can be proc from the Storm Grenade, or if you're using arc weapons, you get a multi-kill. Amplified can be procced from that. In the last column, I like Shield Crush, so while I have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage, and while you're amplified or radiant, your grenade recharges faster and deals increased damage. Then lastly, Transference, gain increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent, and weapon final blows while Transcendent, refund light and dark energy after Transcendence ends. Now I will say, if you are going to be using the Vortex Grenade with passive Dominance for the weekend, I do like Void Hegemony and Expanding Abyss, so keep those things in mind. Now for your weapon options, you can honestly use what you like here, which is pretty cool, as long as those weapons match up with whatever mod you're using in regards to Siphon mods, Reserve mods, and Weapon Surge mods. You're pretty much going to be good to go. But I'll go over some of my loadouts. First up, I like Outbreak Perfected in my primary slot. This thing is fantastic. I got to craft it with Rewind rounds, and Anti-Barrier just makes it absolutely fantastic. Pairing that with something like Indebted Kindness is good because sidearms can stun unstoppable champions, but with my Indebted Kindness in particular, I have Volt Shot, which means once I get a kill and reload, that next shot is going to proc Volt Shot and Jolt, which means I can stun Overload champs with this sidearm in particular. I just need to get a kill first. It does require a little bit of setup, but to be honest, there's usually always adds somewhere around. Then I just pair this with an Arc Rocket for damage because it matches here, so it'll match some of my mods. Another setup that I like is using the Call Special Sidearm in my primary slot here. This thing is fantastic. Got this thing crafted. Comes with Slice and Desperate Measures enhanced. Again, sidearms can stun unstoppable champions, so I got that one handled. Plus, whenever I create Tangle, I can proc Threaded Blast for the bigger explosion, which is nice. Pairing that with something like Graviton Lance in the energy slot is just crazy good. Anti-Barrier is good. This thing is good for ad clear. It just wipes out rooms of ads. you cannot hate Graviton Lance, and since this is Void, I'm pairing that up with Edge Transit for DPS, but honestly, any Void Heavy will do here. I know some people talked about using Monte Carlo because hits with a weapon give you your melee back, and whenever you get a kill has a chance to fully refund one melee charge, so that can be decent, but auto rifles don't have any champion mods this season, so it feels kind of weird. I know some people talked about the Wish Keeper as well, since it can suspend targets once you get Snare Weaver procced up, but to be honest, it just requires so much work to do that, and that's why I just opted to use Outbreak Perfected. But like I said, use any weapons that you want to use for this as long as they match up with your armor mods and also whatever champions that you need to deal with for whatever activity you're doing. Before diving into armor mods, let's talk about what stats to look for. First up being resilience. We talk about this every video. Try to have tier 10 100 resilience. It's going to give you a 30% damage reduction, and you definitely want to take advantage of that as much as possible. Secondly, I would focus on strength. Strength is tied to how fast we can get the melee back, and obviously we want to abuse that as much as possible. Next, I would focus on discipline because that is tied to how fast we can get the grenade back, but we'll also have Devour to get it back even faster, so that's why I did it as my third option. But to be honest, resilience is the first one, and then strength. On my helmet, I'm using Kinetic Siphon, so those rapid kinetic weapon final blows will create orbs of power. You know, I am using Outbreak Perfected, but again, depending on what weapons you're using, match that up with the Siphon mod, and then I'm just using Heavy Ammo Finder and then Heavy Ammo Scout, but you can toss on Special Ammo Finder with Scout, or any of these other mods if you'd like. On the gauntlets, I'm using double momentum transfer, so when I cause damage with my grenade, it's going to reduce my melee cooldown, and then also with firepower, if I get a grenade final blow, it'll create an orb of power. On the chest piece, I'm using Arc Reserve so I can have more ammo for my Indebted Kindness and Hothead, but again, just make sure your reserve mod matches up with the weapon type that you're using. And for your resistance mods, again, just match those up with whatever activity you're doing. On the boots, I do like recuperation, so I get health back each time I pick up an orb of power. This is really good for harder content as a just-in-case thing, but for easier content, I do like having on invigoration, so it reduces my melee cooldown each time I pick up an orb of power. Then lastly, I'm rocking double arc weapon surge to match up with Indebted Kindness and Hothead, so your arc weapons gain a small bonus to damage while you have any armor charge. Your armor charge now decays over time. Essentially, when you collect orbs of power, you're going to gain an armor charge. With this build, you can have a max of 3 armor charges, and with these blue mods, it puts a 10-second timer on that armor charge. So at 3 armor charges, we can have 30 seconds of bonus weapon damage. Lastly, on the class item, I like time dilation so that decaying armor charge has a longer duration. So that 10 seconds that I mentioned actually gets bumped up to 15 seconds. So at 3 armor charges, we can have 45 seconds of that bonus weapon damage. And then double outreach, so it reduces my melee cooldown when I use my class ability. For my final thoughts, the one thing that I really like about this exotic in regards to Prismatic is that it is so versatile. The only thing that you really need to use to make it work is Arcane Needle. Everything else you can switch out the way you like, especially in endgame content. Being able to handle 2 types of champions intrinsically, you can also rock Song of Flame and pretty much survive and tank every shot, even from bosses and champions and whatnot. And then pairing that with pretty much your favorite weapons that can deal DPS, that can handle champions, use whatever mod you like to match up with those weapons and get your abilities back faster. I'll be completely honest, when I saw the preview for this exotic, I didn't think that I would like it as much as I do, but to be honest, this is easily one of the best exotics that come out for Warlock in a long time, right next to Speaker Sight. Yes, Speaker Sight's good for healing, and yeah, it's cool in that regard, but for this one in particular, it just works so well for endgame content. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is my Mataiodoxia Warlock builds. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm actually going to put the dim link for the Prismatic and Strand build in the description, so if you want to copy everything that I'm using, down to the subclass, the armor mods, the weapons, even the drip if you'd like. Again, ornaments and shaders are going to be included in that dim link if you want to copy all that. And then go test out for yourself and come back to this video and let me know what you like using. Like I said, this exotic is super versatile and pretty much anything is going to work with this build. In any event, if you enjoyed watching, be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on that bell next to notifications so you don't miss out on any other final shape builds I'm going to be dropping here on the channel. If you didn't know, we live stream here on YouTube and then also over on Twitch. Again, there's going to be the Salvation's Edge raid. There's going to be the new activity to get the exotic class items, the co-op mode. There's going to be plenty of stuff to do. So if you want to hop in for any of that, again, hop in the chat. And then also, if you want to be proactive, join my Discord. Again, people are going to be looking to play activities together. So hop on in. We're also talking about anime, tech, and plenty of other games as well. Lastly, if you want to help support the channel even more so I can continue making this content for you guys, you can always look into becoming a member. If you don't know what a membership is, it's essentially like a Twitch subscription. Again, you're going to get access to the emotes, the monthly badges, and the big thing, which is getting early access to all of my videos. So if you want to look into becoming a member, all you have to do is press the join button, next subscribe, and that'll give you a rundown with all the details you need. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been your boy. We'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!